Well, good morning, and we're going to be looking today for a little while here at the book of Revelation. It's a great book. God gave John a revelation of what was, what is to come while he was on the island of Patmos. The message I want to share with you is called, I Know Where You Live. Now that can be a threat or a comforting promise. I guess it all depends who's making the promise and what your relationship is with that person. Sometimes we go through things where we wonder, does anybody know what I'm dealing with? Does anybody relate to where I am at? Sometimes we wonder, does anybody even care? Even strong followers of the Lord in the Bible find themselves occasionally in this position, sometimes more than occasionally. We think of the great prophet Elijah kind of giving up before the Lord. It's enough, Lord, take me home. He's in a position of wondering, is there anybody else out there? He actually thinks he's all alone. The Apostle Paul in Corinth was under attack, and the Lord had to send him an angel to speak to him and tell him not to be afraid. I have much people in this city. You're not alone. I know where you are. I know what your circumstances is. Even the Lord Jesus Christ went through a period of such intense and deep personal crisis that he began to sweat great drops of blood and to ask the Lord to take his destiny from him. Lord, if you can take this cup from me, please let it pass out of my hands, but not my will, your will be done. Today, I just want to remind all of us that God knows where you live. He knows your circumstances. He knows where you are. He knows the hairs of your head. He knows everything that you're wrestling with, troubled by, overwhelmed by, and that has become a difficulty or a struggle for you. God knows where you live. More than that, He intends for you a marvelous purpose. But sometimes, and perhaps right now for some of you, or one of you, or a number of you, right now it's just impossible to see what that purpose is and where it is and how anything can come out of where your life is right now, where you are living. Now, the background of Revelation, as we know, it was written by the Apostle John. He had been exiled to Patmos. You know, we think about that, he went to a nice island, and just think about that. This was one of the worst punishments that they could give. I wouldn't say it wasn't as bad as solitary confinement in a jail cell, which is, to me, a form of torture. But it is one of the punishments they would use, especially against political prisoners, people who had become a nuisance, people who they wanted out of the picture, people whose activities and actions and words they wanted out of society. They would send them into exile. And all throughout the ancient world, there were figures who had become significant figures who were tried, especially in Roman courts, and they were banished to exile as one of their punishments. John Chrysostom, the 4th century bishop, was put into exile and died on his way to exile. And this happens throughout ancient history. It is a major punishment. So as far as we know, John is alone on this island, fending for himself. No one communicating with him. Under a sentence that says to him, you are unwanted. Not only you are unwanted, we are banishing you. We despise you. We despise everything you stand for. We despise everything you've done, and we despise your God. Go away. That's what exile is about. And that's what's happened here in the book of Revelation. You know what's amazing? When this dark night comes. The glory of God shows up in a way that is just as deep, just as profound, if not far deeper and far more profound. Jesus said it plainly. Blessed are you when men hate you, they persecute you, and they cast out your name as evil. Rejoice and be glad in that day, for great is your reward in heaven. Church history, and even modern church history, has repeated that over and over again. It doesn't eliminate the suffering. It doesn't do away with the suffering. It doesn't minimize the suffering. But it says, in the midst of your brokenness, in the midst of your problems, your trial, whatever it is you're facing, God's grace is greater. God's power is greater. Even when you're surrounded by sinful opposition and temptation on every hand, when darkness pours in like a flood, the Lord lifts up a standard. Where sin abounds, grace much more abounds. So I want to tell you, wherever you're living right now, God's great, magnificent, powerful, overwhelming grace is available to you. And He knows your address. He knows exactly where you're living. He knows where you are. So John, on this island of Patmos, has his eyes open to the world of heaven and earth, to the world of spirits, to the throne of God, to the demonic depths, to the present and to the future, to the power centers of the world in his time and in future times. He understands the mysteries of what's going on around here. He sees visions that only God can give him, and God chooses to give him in the midst of his isolation and in the midst of his rejection, in the midst of perhaps his despair. Let's make no bones about it. Just because he is a saint and a great man of God, it doesn't mean that he was not in a state of downcast despair when he was put on this island with no one there to fend for himself, no one that he could interact with. At the very least, there he is. But God is with him, and he is recognizing his condition. He said in the first line of the book, he says, I was exiled to Patmos for the patience and the testimony of the saints, for the tribulation that the saints go through. I experienced pressure and stress in Patmos. But then God visited him and revealed himself to John. And in the midst of this exile that he experienced, we are told that he wrote 7 letters. He was commanded by Jesus, who appeared to him. He was commanded to write 7 letters. And the 7 letters he was commanded to write were to 7 churches in Asia Minor. And they all had a specific message, and they actually covered a specific pattern. The letters would have the destination, the city, the church to which it was written. In the letters, Christ identified himself uniquely in every letter. Him who has the 7 stars in his hands, him from whom a sword came out of his mouth, him whose eyes are like lightning. He identified himself in every letter in a unique way in relationship to that specific church, how he was relating to them. And then normally he would commend the church for something positive, and he would also rebuke and warn the church for something negative. And then he would call them back to himself, and then he would close out each message with a promise, a blessing to him who overcomes. And we see this pattern in the letter to Pergamum. Now, Pergamum was a very significant city, according to the ancient writer Pliny. It was the most distinguished city of Asia Minor. It was a capital of the province. It was closely aligned with Rome. In fact, it was directly controlled by the Roman Empire. It was a place of prestige. It was a citadel. There was a huge mountain in Pergamum, and a lot of it was built on the mountain. It was also a place of remarkable occult, false worship, and false activity. There was a temple to Zeus there, a big temple, a huge temple. Even the ruins are said to be most impressive. There was a temple to Athena, a temple to Dionysus, a temple to Asclepius, the god of healing. And there was also an altar for worship, sacrifice to the emperor. It was a center of emperor worship, which was the big conflict between the church and the empire in that day, that the Christians said there was only one God, the living God who made heaven and earth, revealed in Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, and that while the emperor was a minister of God and appointed by God and was given the sword to execute and exercise legitimate functions, he was not a God and would never be acknowledged a God, and anyone who asked us to acknowledge him as a God would be disappointed, because we would not submit to that, and we would even give our lives that it not be done. And so there was a temple, there was an altar to Caesar that was put there in honor of Caesar Augustus in 29 BC. So this is the city that John is writing to, and there's a church there that lives in a difficult place. A place of political power, a place of occult influence, a place of false religion, false philosophy. And it's also a place where false beliefs have crept into the church and convinced followers of Christ to release, to let go of godly, divine, moral teachings. They become what are called antinomians, which means against the law. Those who do not believe the law of God has any place in ruling their actions or attitudes. And they become what are called Gnostics, who are very licentious people. And also some of them very new agey and hyper-spiritual, but not connected to the head, Jesus Christ. There's a lot going on here in Pergamum. There's a lot going on. And it's hard to sort through. So with that background, I want to say, let's just take a minute to look through what John said to the church at Pergamum. He said this: to the angel in Pergamum write, the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. This is how Jesus identifies himself to Pergamum. It's significant that he says, I have the sharp two-edged sword, the sword that comes out of his mouth. He is not talking about a physical sword. He's talking about a spiritual sword. He's talking about the Word of God. He's talking about divine authority. And that's very significant, because this is the seat of Caesar's power in Asia Minor. This is the seat of empire and political power in Asia Minor. And while the emperor is asking them to worship him, God is saying, I have more authority. I have a sword they cannot wield and that they do not have. This is the one you're dealing with. He says to them, I know where you dwell. The word is katoikeo. It means where you live, where you make your home. I know where you're living. I know where you're at. I know what's going on in your life. I know exactly what's going on in your life. Every detail. I know where you dwell. Where Satan's throne is. And they haven't decided, is he talking about the throne of Zeus? Is he talking about the throne of emperor worship? Or is he talking about the collective atmosphere of Pergamum, which is full of occult, New Age, unholy, and unworthy belief that is demonically empowered against the people of God? Yet, you hold fast to my name. This is the commendation. You have been faithful to the living God in the midst of a society that rejects you, that hates you, and rejects everything you stand for, and it's putting intense pressure on you to compromise. You've held fast to my name. You didn't deny my faith. Even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness. Now, this is a very specific crisis in the city of Pergamum, where there was a particular representative of the faith who tradition tells us was being forced to honor the emperor with a sacrifice and who was burned alive for his unwillingness to do so. And God is commending them. Jesus is commending. He says, you have been faithful even unto the point of death in resisting the power and the force and the spirit that is at work in the land where you live. And he's called my faithful witness, and the word there is martyreo. It is the first time we know of that anyone is referred, even though we know that Stephen was martyred, he wasn't referred to as a martyr. It's the first time in history that we know that someone is referred to as bearing witness is called a martyr. That's the same word. People are martyred because they bear witness to something, because they bear witness to Christ. He was killed, he was martyred among you, is what they are saying, where Satan dwells. And he goes on to say, I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam. Balaam taught the people of God to abandon the Decalogue, to abandon the covenant of moral order that God has established among his people, and to throw it out. He says, there's some among you who follow this teaching. They say they follow me, but they abandon my calling, my commands, my rules. We're not antinomians. We believe the law has a place in our lives. We just know that we can't fulfill it in our own power. It is only by the grace of God that we fulfill the law. We don't cast it behind our back. We fulfill it by the grace of God alone. That's the difference between a legalist and an antinomian. A legalist says, I fulfill it in my own power. An antinomian says, it doesn't make any difference. A follower of Christ says, I know it's important. I can't fulfill it unless God puts his law in my heart and writes it in my mind. That's the new covenant. So that truth in the heart results in truth in the life. He says, you have something teaching you to live however you please in a licentious way, casting these things behind your back. You taught Balaam put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel so that they might eat food sacrificed to idol and practice sexual immorality. So eating food sacrificed to idols means they fully participated in the occult society around them. They were one of the guys, one of the girls. And their commitment to Christ made no difference. There was no distinction between who they were and who their neighbor was. How they behaved and how their neighbor behaved. They simply added the name of Christ to who they were. He says, I have this against you because there are some who believe that's what it means to be one of my followers. And you have also, and this is a very similar kind, we don't know too much about these heresies, it's a very similar kind of heresy, have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. And we believe that their teachings are very similar. False teaching, false guides. And therefore repent. If not, I will come to you soon and war against them with the sword from my mouth. So that's the warning and the call to repentance. And we do well to take heed to them. But here's what I want to focus on today. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. What does all this mean? Well, first of all, I just want to mention this sword that Jesus mentions. We know that this sword from Hebrews is the word of the living God. It's active, it's sharper than any two-edged sword. It pierces to the division of soul and spirit, the joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. No creature is hidden from his sight. All are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. All are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. I know where you live. I know where you live. I know everything about you. And as I said, that could be deeply comforting, or it could be concerning. Depends on where we stand. He knows where you live because he is identified with you. He knows Antipas's situation because he himself was a martyr. He knows what it means to experience external opposition from the world and the spirit that is in the world. He knows what it is to have deep hostility expressed against himself. When he was before Pilate, when he was before the Sanhedrin. Whatever you are going through, maybe in your workplace, unfortunately maybe in your home, maybe in a relationship with a child or a coworker, you have experienced deep hostility expressed against you. That's what happened to Antipas. And Antipas was faithful. You know why? Because Christ was with him. And when Christ is with you, maybe you're in your classroom teaching. Maybe you're in your office leading. Whatever you're doing, and deep hostility is expressed against you because of who you are or because of your faith. God knows where you live because he's experienced it himself. He's been through it. He knows all about it. He can identify with you. And if you will trust in him, you will experience the grace and the power of him identifying with you. I've told this story many times. I love it. I can't help it. Gary, I can't help it. I got to tell it again. Gary knows this man personally, Prem Pradhan. Imprisoned for preaching the gospel, sent from prison to prison in Nepal, converting all the prisoners everywhere he went, and then he became a big problem to the authorities. And then they put him in this little solitary confinement box. And he says, I was reading the word in the box, which he was from memory calling up what he had memorized. He said, when I came to the place where it said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? As I was recalling the book of Acts, in this little solitary confinement box, which would drive me crazy, he says, I was filled with joy. God's glory descended upon me, and I started praising the Lord. I said, oh, God, thank you, because I knew that it was not me they were persecuting, it was Christ in me, and I felt the presence of the Lord in this phenomenal manner. And the guard outside, as you've heard many times, said, who are you talking to in there? He says, I'm talking to Jesus. He said, well, how did he get in there? And actually, the story is the guard was brought to Christ as well. You want to know how to do that. Why does Jesus know where you live? Whatever your experience. And it may not be a hostile thing. It may be fear. It may be sickness. It may be concern about your future. Could be 100 things, a concern about a loved one. Why does he know where you live? It's very simple, because our faith is a faith of incarnation. God became one of us that he might experience the temptations, the trials, the concerns, and the difficulties that we face. He identified with us totally identified with you where you live. He came to be where we live. We're told this also in the book of Hebrews. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Jesus knows where you live. And he intends a marvelous purpose for you, but sometimes that purpose is impossible to see. Twila Paris wrote it this way: He is the dearest friend while others come and go. He is the dearest friend that you will ever know. May you ever know. That he is a light in the deepest shadow and the wings of a spirit in flight. He is a spring in the dry, burning desert. He is a song. He's a song in the longest night. He knows where you live. He's there. He shows up. He's already shown up. He showed up 2,000 years ago, and he shows up now. And he shows up for the people of Pergamum, and he shows up for those who are under stress. And he says to them, I know the pressure you're under. I know the temptation you are facing right now. I know how near to despair you are. And there might be one person here who is near to, there's always someone near to despair. And I know my purpose for you. It's unchanging. And your faith must hold fast even when you are in this time of trial, because I know where you live. I am there with you. Not only does he know where we live because he's identified with us, he knows where we live because we identify with him. This is a two-sided thing. See, Paul said that I may know him in the fellowship of his sufferings and in the power of his resurrection. Jesus said to his disciples, if any man follow me, he's got to take up his cross and come after me. Who seeks to save his life will lose it. Who loses his life for my sake will find it. He identifies with us, but we identify with him. We have to be willing to carry the cross. We have to be willing to experience whatever is necessary for us to fulfill his will and calling upon our life. That is the meaning of discipleship. And the church and its history is full of such people who have identified with him, even going to the cross. This kind of action is going on all over the world right now. This was written way back in January 2013. It could have been written last week by a man named Peter Leithart in First Things. It was an article entitled Witness Unto Death. It's a long article, just a small portion. As I said, this could have been written last week, and it could have been written any week throughout the history of the church. Last week, gunmen from the Islamic sect Boko Haram attacked the Church of the Brethren in the village of Adagara in northern Nigeria, killing 2 and torching the church on their way out. Over several days, the terrorist group killed dozens in the same region and forced hundreds to flee. In the northeastern city of Potuskum, 31 people were murdered over a 3-day period recently, and a church was burned. On October 21st, most churches in Potuskum canceled Sunday services. Boko Haram terrorists have killed more than 1,000 this year, nearly 3,000 since their surge began in 2009. They've left dozens of churches in ruins and, of course, hundreds, maybe thousands of followers of Christ. Dead. Throughout history, God's people have identified with Jesus to the point of laying down their life for the gospel. So look, we got problems, okay? We got problems. I'm speechless. You say, good, finally. He knows where we live because he identified with us, but also because we identify with him. There's thousands of stories. Right today, this is going on, I'm sure, in places like Afghanistan and other places. Friends, people that we know, are right on the cusp of these kinds of conflicts. I know your works, I know your tribulation, I know where you live, and I visit you there. I come to be with you in that context. A marvelous story is told of Richard Wurmbrand, a Romanian pastor who was imprisoned for many years for his faith, and he tells the story how he was in a basement, a dungeon area of a Romanian prison, dark, damp, alone. Horrible, horrible thought. Even the thought of it is horrible to me. And he says, during that time I was alone and I could only pray. There was absolutely nothing to do, no one to talk to. And then suddenly, the heavens visited my cell, and I saw the glory of God, and it was as if the whole place had been turned into a diamond or a series of diamonds, and I saw the glory of God, and He was with me there. I don't want to go into a dungeon. I really don't. I don't call for, desire, or seek any of these things. I certainly don't want them. But you know what comforts me? No matter what you experience, God knows where you live, and He will come there and He will visit you. He will make Himself known. Not because you've sought it, because it has sought you. This damaging and destructive set of circumstances, and God will help you at the break of day. There's so many stories. There's a man named Valery Baranov who was a Christian musician in the old Soviet Union. He was considered to be a nuisance to society, and he was removed. And he was put in, one of the things they did, they'd say these people are crazy, they're nutty. And they'd put in a psychiatric prison where they would be treated with psychoactive drugs. It's awful. I can't even think of what was done to him or what the outcome was supposed to be. He was released. Eventually, you can find some of his things on YouTube. But I watched a video of his that was playing once when I was teaching in Ukraine. And, there's something about the students there. They are the children, the grandchildren, people who paid incredible price. And there's a whole spirit about them that I find almost tangible as far as its devotion and love because of what they know, what they've experienced. And they played this video that had been made, and it kind of amazed me. And it was a picture of the power of the beast to transform a personality from a human personality into a machine. And that's what the beast wants to do, to make you a machine who is totally and irrevocably devoted to it. And that's what emperor worship was all about. And so on this video, these people would be on an assembly line, and there was a big stamp on each person's forehead. And they came up along the assembly line. They were human. They had human features. As soon as the stamp hit them, they turned into a robot. That's what Satan wants to do to you and me. That's what he wants to do. And that's why people like Antipas knew they could not submit to emperor worship. Now, I'm not going to get into this. Where does that line start? Some of you think it starts one place, and some of you think it starts another place. I'm not going there today, folks. Not going there. I know where I think it starts. It starts when we cannot worship our God or follow His commandments. That's where it starts. All right, I got you all inflamed and agitated, but we're not going to go there. Just take an aspirin or something. All right. Finally, he says, I know where you live because I have lived there myself. I know where you live because you identify with me, I identify with you. But finally, here is the reward. I want to give you something. I want to give you the hidden manna. What is the hidden manna? There's a lot of speculation about this, but the hidden manna there was manna put in the Holy of Holies that Moses had given to the people. There was hidden manna. You see, these people were being pushed to partake in feasts that were given for false god. And the Christians would hold back from that and not participate in the feasts that were devoted to a false god, and so they were rejected by society. They experienced alienation, just like I said about John in the beginning. He was alienated, he was pushed out, he was unwanted as a follower of Christ. And in this alienation, he was excluded. The people of Pergamum would have been excluded from society, excluded from the meals. And God is saying, in your alienation, I'm going to give you something better than the meal that's sacrificed to idol. I'm going to give you the hidden manna of my presence. And in that day, you're going to be invited not out, but invited in to the wedding feast of the Lamb, and everyone else will be excluded from that. And then he says also, I will give you a white stone. So the hidden manna is given to those who refuse to attend and eat public pagan festivals, according to interpreters. And the white stone has many possible meanings, but two of the most significant are, it's a jury verdict. If the jury would give the accused, if they believe him or her not guilty, they would give that person a white stone that said not guilty. I will give you a white stone. And another use of a white stone was as essentially a ticket to an event, a ticket to a great event. God says, you are no longer on the outside, you're on the inside. You are not guilty. Now you have a ticket to the inside. And sometimes a white stone was used among friends, kind of like a friendship ring that would be signifying that they were welcome to stay at each other's house any time. God has given you a white stone. He's welcomed you inside. He's welcomed you in. You are not excluded. And then he says there will be a new name written on it. The new name is of great significance in many cultures. Jesus gave Cephas a new name. He called him a rock. Peter, the rock. Cephas also is a rock. You are Peter. You are a rock. Barnabas was given a new name, son of encouragement. The name John means son of grace. God, or rather, Yahweh is gracious. Johann. Yeshua means Yahweh saves. Names have meanings. And when Adam named the creatures, he was naming something about their character and their essence. And so when God gives you a new name, he imparts something to you that is unique to you about your character and your essence. And I love what Lewis wrote about this. What can be more a man's own than his new name, which even in eternity remains a secret between God and him? And what shall we take this to mean, except that each redeemed shall forever know and praise some aspect of the divine beauty better than any other creature can? Why else were individuals created, but God, loving all infinitely, should also love each distinctly? He loves you distinctly for who you are. You have a unique relationship with God, and like anybody else's relationship with God, because you are a unique human being with a new name that remains between you and God. God knows where you live, brothers and sisters. He intends a marvelous purpose that is sometimes impossible to see. You may face anxieties or disorders or fear of the future. You may wonder if your sacrifices have made any difference. Why hang on to this faith? You may be asking, what about these painful memories, this grief? Will it go away? You may be asking about a sense of loss. Will there be in heaven? There will not. He will dry every tear. and he will heal every wound, and you will abide in his presence for eternity, for he will make all things new. I know, says the Lord, where you live.